So, ready to go?
Ready to go.
All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. So, today on the behalf of Milestones, we will be discussing an important article that I just came recently out, written by some wonderful scholars and activists. I may begin to introduce you all first before we give some context about what this conversation is about, and inshallah we'll take it from there. And for all those on the live chat, feel free to shoot out some questions. Inshallah, the authors will be able to respond to that. So first of all, I'd like to pass on an apology. Our respected Abdel Malik Ali, the Amir of Oakland Islamic Community Center, couldn't make it today due to travel issues. Unfortunately, it would have been great to have him here, but such is the decree that he can't be here. But we do still have the authors of the initial article, and I'll introduce them all now, inshallah. We have Hannibal Abdul-Shakur, who's organizer for Justice for Oscar Grant and former member of Oakland Cop Watch. Brother Tanzeen Doha, anthropologist of Islam and anti-war organizer, and sister Isra Ibrahim, Muslim Sudanese organizer based in South Florida and pre-medical student at Florida International University. Assalamu alaikum to you all.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So on a personal level, thank you for the article that opened up a series of important questions. I found it well written and provocative at times, but also deeply intelligent in a way. American Muslim community. Now, I want to start by thanking all the speakers that have been able to attend, inshallah, for their wonderful article, but also for an apology. Unfortunately, one of the brothers couldn't make it today, Abdel Malik Ali, the Amir of Oakland Islamic Community Center, due to some constraints regarding travel, unfortunately won't be able to join us. It's a loss, but inshallah, the conversation can still be of great benefit. We have three wonderful authors here, activists and scholars, who wrote a quite provocative and interesting, and I thought intellectually deep article about the current condition of Muslim activism in the West, in particular the traditions that we lean on, some of which we appropriate, and to hopefully expand and open the debate about the various directions that we can take. I'd like to introduce them all first and foremost. So we'll start with Brother Hannibal Abdul-Shakur, who's an organizer for Justice for Oscar Grant and a former member of Oakland Cop Watch. We have Brother Tanzeen Doha, anthropologist of Islam and anti-war organizer, and Sister Isra Ibrahim, Muslim Sudanese organizer based in South Florida and a pre-medical student at Florida International University. So assalamu alaikum to you all.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi.
My name is Yassir Morsi, and I'm author of Radical Skin Moderate Masks. And I'm not quite sure how to introduce myself, but for this purpose, I'm the host, and I'm very much involved in activism at the community grassroots level. So a big part of the article that I enjoyed reading was about the various different directions that we're taking in this current moment and where it's taken us, and inevitably where we can go forward and how much of our activism is tied to what is called the American Project. And I might start here with Sister Isra, if I can, with the question, if you can tell us a little bit more on the American Project. You mentioned how the different positions like the left, the right, the center, all cohere to form the American Project. Maybe inshallah you can expand more on this. Many in the Muslim community would say that Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, for example, is a bigger problem, and Suleiman means well, and so on. How would you respond to this initial claim?
Well, first of all, assalamu alaikum. It's definitely great to be included on this panel. As the youngest person, it's great to learn from people with experience for sure. And I think it's definitely been a while for having this type of conversation. So just to start, I think one important point that we have to get out of the way, particularly when we talk about American Muslim leaders, is that we can't reduce the conversation to just one person, right? So the article focuses on the characters of the wolf and the fox in order to talk about and deconstruct the different political categories and the type of leaders within American Muslim leadership. And it's important to talk about the different types of leaders that exist within that spectrum, because we have to identify their political function and their effect and how they ultimately pacify radical traditions. So Hamza Yusuf is definitely easier to criticize because his allegiance with, with the current administration and whatnot, the way in the past how he's openly expressed white nativist positions, like if you don't like it here, go back to your country, things like that is very much easy to kind of criticize. But I think the role of Omar Suleiman is very important to analyze here and to deconstruct, because I think it's important how both these political types of leaders ultimately seek to legitimize the American project. And I say legitimize the American project because as Hamza Yusuf operates as the wolf, Omar Suleiman operates as the type of fox, as a friendly Muslim, how you have the loud races versus the nice races and so forth. But at the end of the day, both of them kind of share the same political function of pacifying the radical tradition within grassroots organizing, and how ultimately they both urge their Muslim base, their social base, to assimilate into white settler culture and politics. This talk about how Omar Suleiman talks about he doesn't like nationalism, but he likes patriotism. And I think that's a very important statement that we have to analyze in what exactly is his political function. And again, this isn't to be reduced to his character or personality, but about the political type and function that he serves within American Muslim leadership. And how ultimately the entirety of American Muslim leadership seeks to legitimize, American empire, to ask their Muslim social base to assimilate to the values of the society we live in, and ultimately to reproduce those very structures within our communities.
Right. Thank you for that. I mean, I guess a big part of what I took out of the article is precisely that, some of the themes that you were touching on. We're speaking about typologies, positionalities, what the overarching political project is, what's at stake, and so forth. And it's unfortunate, not that I want to spend too much time on the criticisms or what gets thrown our way when we speak of these typologies and the broader question, but a lot of people personalize it and make it about issues of individuals. And it's almost seen as slight character assassinations to bring some of these leaders into a conversation about accountability and where they are in this American project. And so I appreciate the response in many ways of what we're talking about. And I guess both the article and this roundtable is more about a discussion of the dynamics of power in this particular moment, one that's constituted in an American conversation, but has, I mean, I'm from Australia and British, but has multiple consequences beyond just what's happening in America. So maybe somebody can comment on that, and how much the American project, or, I mean, look, I will say it this way, the amount of influence, the conversations that American, forgive me, I don't mean to be derogatory here, American celebrity imams have in creating conversations here in Australia is quite telling. So part of the interesting aspect of your article was that you were also touching on this imperial project implicit within the American project. So as Americans, how much are you conscious and aware of the, I'm not sure, I heard the ding ding.
Is Amir Abdel Malik on the phone?
Yes.
Assalamu alaikum, Amir.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Assalamu alaikum. Yassir, so you need to introduce our Amir now.
Mashallah,
thank you for joining in, Amir, from the phone, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah.
Just did the first question and that's it, but inshallah, we're very honored to have you.
Alhamdulillah, it's an honor to be here.
Inshallah. So the brother Yassir was continuing on the whole notion of the American project, and the brother Yassir is the host, and the three of us and the four of us now are going to be the panelists, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. It's a great honor to have you here, brother. And I may introduce you again for those who may have missed it, but Brother Abdel Malik Ali is the Amir of Oakland Islamic Community Center, and I'm sure his contribution will be very welcomed, inshallah. So I'll just finish off my question and ask how cognitive are Americans, and especially those around the role of leadership in the broader imperial project of America and how much it impacts Muslims in the West elsewhere. Any responders here, inshallah, not just the Sister Isra.
So your question is the impact of American quote-unquote celebrity leaders on other parts of the Muslim world, particularly like, let's say, the Western Muslims like Australia and the UK? Is that the question?
Yeah, I mean, there's implicit in the argument that you're all making is that there's a naturalizing of the American project. It's like making America great again, believing in its fantasy, its white mythology, that it's there, it's a project in progress. But there's an imperial element to that, a global aspect to it, which has great impact on Muslims abroad, especially in the English-speaking world. And just to introduce everybody, because we are having here, if you will, a conversation that transcends just the American context.
I would really love for Hannibal to weigh in if he wants to. I don't want to pressure or pass the buck, but I have a few things to say, but I know Hannibal also, I'm sure, has a bunch of things to say about that. If you want to address that.
Inshallah. So, Bismillah. Well, first of all, I would like to say, first and foremost, assalamu alaikum to the believers. Thank you for everyone who's attending or listening or watching with a sincere intention to engage with the ideas that we're trying to deal with. Because, like the sister said earlier, because as the sister said earlier, and I want to reiterate that as well, this is not about trying to tear down a brother. We don't want to tear down Omar Suleiman or Hamza Yusuf for that matter, but what we want to do is we want to confront very serious issues that have impacts on all of our lives, especially those of us, who are living in communities where they have a greater influence, and so with respect to this article that we wrote, we are trying to, guard the honor of Shaheed. Malcolm X is Shaheed, inshallah. And one of the things that's happening today is that people are attempting to utilize him or incorporate him or appropriate him in a variety of different ways, and it's, he remains historically one of those figures that stands out. He stands out for a lot of different reasons, but the main thing which we all can recognize him for, whether Muslim or not Muslim, is his principled manner of dealing with the issues facing himself and his community. And so he was a principled man, and he stood on the principled convictions which he came to through struggle, through study, through his sacrifices. And so it's important for us as people who have learned from Malcolm and people who have been impacted by him and his words and his life. It's important for us to maintain that history, maintain that knowledge, and to defend any kind of violence that may be done to his legacy and to his name and his honor. And so that's the main spirit in which we wrote this. So that must be understood first and foremost as like, that's the foundation of which we're even talking about this in the first place. But to continue and to get at your specific question, Malcolm X spoke a lot about leadership. He has a wealth of speeches, interviews and things that he did where he was talking about leadership, and he was talking about, some of the traps and pitfalls of leadership, and one of the examples that he gave us is who he called the Big Six, and so when he talked about the Big Six, he specifically talked about grassroots organizing, grassroots, to some degree, spontaneous uprisings. And he talked about how, when the community was becoming organized and mobilized, and they were seeing these various legal setbacks, or they're seeing the way in which the government was choosing to deal with the civil rights movement, which was violent, repressive, etc. And it started to take a turn from more docile types of action to more spontaneous and practical direct action. And Malcolm specifically talked about people who had plans to shut down airports. They had plans to shut down Washington, etc. And in the midst of this spontaneous organizing, those elite within the white power structure, within the within the economic system, within the capitalist economic structure, those elites got together and gathered up the so-called leaders that they found to be acceptable. They gathered the leaders who they found to be malleable to the project, to the imperial project, and to the white nationalist project of America. And that was what ultimately their interest in civil rights was. So they gathered up, these people, and they had a meeting where they put up about $800,000, which was, today would be a lot of money, but back then it was even more money. And they said, look, you guys have to go and steer this spontaneous grassroots organizing, and you have to make sure that it goes in a particular direction that's favorable to us. And they said, well, we're not a part of it. And I'm paraphrasing from Malcolm, a story that he's telling us in Message to the Grassroots. Well, they're not a part of it. So they created a campaign to use the media and use all of the resources and tools of influence at their disposal to make these people as the leaders of it, to present to the masses, to the grassroots, to the community, these people as if they were the ones who started and led and created this kind of spirit and this kind of mobilization, which in fact they weren't. And they were sent in ultimately as infiltrators to sway the people and move the people towards something that's more favorable to the American project. That was the function of the Big Six during the time of Malcolm. And that's their function today. We can see that they're consistent with that program. When we look at certain celebrity imams or, celebrity sheikhs or what have you, we find them coming into situations now that racial politics have come to another heightened state, in terms of we're at an age and we're in a time comparable to the 60s and the 70s in the sense of people's heightened awareness about racial politics, oppression, colonialism, etc. Because these contradictions are coming to a point of they're coming to a crushing point for certain people. So, now that we're in that age again, and we're living in an era like that again, there's a need again for these type of leaders to come in and to become part of the grassroots movement, but to steer it in a particular direction. And so, for us here in California, we saw in Sacramento, there was an African-American Muslim brother who was killed by the police, and he was unarmed. And the evidence came out that they really just killed him in cold blood, and the grassroots movement in Sacramento was very dynamic in this moment. They were very dynamic because they were able to shut down an NBA game during the playoffs, and it gathered national attention to the issue of the fact that this black man had been killed in cold blood by the police. And it was I would argue, and I would suggest that history and the details of the matter support this argument that it was their strategic practical thinking of shutting down this NBA game, which gathered attention to the issue, and it became a national issue. And Stephon Clark became one of those names that we talk about nationally. However, when it was time for the funeral, you'd think that, you know, with this Black Muslim being killed, that the Muslim community would be offering some type of leadership in terms of organizing the community, offering you know, spaces for discussion and strategizing on how to deal with these type of things, and you'd expect that the leadership would be offering some type of organized, principled way of engaging the issue. But we find you know, that we had those celebrity imams come in and talk to people about how, you know, it's not about race, you know, race didn't have anything to do with it, and we need to be more forgiving, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, that's fine if, you know, that's your particular line of thinking, and if that's how you sincerely believe that we should deal with issues, is to just forgive it and move on and don't confront it and don't directly deal with the problem. But we can't then turn around and say that we're students of Malcolm, if that's the way that we engage. We can't then turn around and cooperate with the government and the NBA to steer the community away from justice. Because ultimately, you know, and it's a lot of details that I'm trying to get to you on this point, because, you know, we have current history, and then we have, you know, a little bit older history to deal with to put things in context. But ultimately, you know, after that murder, we saw Al Sharpton, we saw Omar Suleiman, we saw Imam Zaid, and they came and talked at the people from a podium. You know, they didn't offer any type of organization. They didn't offer any type of even Islamic guidance with respect to the issue. You know, we know that there's many examples in Ahadith of you know, how to deal with injustices and how to deal with trauma collectively, and how as a community to deal with these type of things. But they did not counsel us on those things. Instead, they counseled us on, you know, the mantras of the state, which is forgiveness and, you know, don't see race, don't deal with the actual issues, that why this man was killed, etc. And at the end of this funeral that they spoke at, in came Matt Barnes from the NBA, which is no coincidence because it was the NBA that they targeted. And it was them targeting the NBA that drew national attention to Stephon Clark's name. So he comes in along with them and offers to pay for a quote unquote peace rally. And ultimately what they're saying is, even though the police killed you and killed one of your community members, you're the ones that we consider violent. So we're going to teach you how to be peaceful, even though you're the ones that are being slaughtered. And ultimately, this kind of inverted logic is what keeps us stifled as a community. And, you know, what ultimately kind of keeps us on our behinds when it's time to get up and do something. And I'm going to cut my...
Yeah. Can I just add one point to that as well? To the point that, you know, Hannibal was making, and Yassir, your question on the imperial angle, I think it's important to examine here the political disconnect American Muslims have as a whole with oppressed Blacks in the US and indigenous people, and also the political disconnect they're starting to have with the global South, right? And so here we can try to examine and deconstruct how American Muslim is being constructed as an identity to further assimilate into, like, you know, colonial whiteness, assimilate into, like, you know, the settler society and whatnot. And here we have to ask, you know, what are the type of leaders that are required to have that identity be constructed and also sustained? So,
yeah. Well, thank you for both your answers and also for outlining the sincerity behind this project and article. but also what's at stake here, both globally and locally, and the violence that we find in local communities. And, may Allah reward those who fight against this injustice and give mercy to those who have suffered from it. But Tanzeen, you had a couple of comments that you wanted to add, continue on this angle of what's at stake.
I have stuff to add, but I'm wondering how Amir is doing, because he's on the phone and he's probably traveling. Okay. So I'd like for him to add his comments, inshallah, if it's possible, Amir.
Inshallah. I think that when our youth are accused of belittling certain people, or they're being accused of trying to tear someone down and what have you, I think it misses the point. I think it's really important to keep in mind that 65 to 70% of our ummah are 35 years old and under. 65 to 70% of the ummah is 35 years old and under. What goes along with that too is that we're living in a period of tajdeed. We're living in a period of Islamic revival. The war on Islam is a reaction to something. What it's reacting to is an Islamic revival. So now we have mostly youth in this ummah, then we're living in an Islamic revival. And now what we're experiencing is a youth quake, as Time magazine pointed out not long ago. Several months ago, there was major demonstrations in Morocco against the government. A few months ago, and that was mostly youth. A few months ago, there were major demonstrations against the government in Algeria. That was mostly youth. And then a couple of months ago, and this is still ongoing, in the Sudan, this was mostly youth. So now what we're seeing is a youth quake. So when we hear these youth who dealt with this article saying what they're saying, this is indicative of what's going on in the world. The youth are seeing things that are not right. The youth are seeing a certain type of leadership that's not a correct leadership based on the Quranic model, based on the model of the Sunnah. It's not correct leadership. And they're going to say something about it. They're going to express themselves through it. And so those of us who've been in the movement for a while, in the struggle for a while, it is within everyone's best interest to listen to what the youth are saying. The youth are saying that celebrity model leadership is wrong. You know what I'm saying? We know that in America, celebrities are worshipped. And as African Americans, we're taught that celebrities are our leaders. And this is not true. The worst type of model leadership to be in a struggle is a celebrity model leadership. Celebrities are not ready to die. Celebrities are not ready to go to jail. Celebrities are not ready to go to the hospital. The celebrity model leadership is a leadership that wants the perks of leadership, but doesn't want the struggles and the hardships and the pain and the sacrifice that goes along with that leadership. Our youth are speaking out. And so when our youth, particularly these youth who wrote this article, again, it's just too simplistic to say, well, you guys are calling people out and you're trying to tear people down. No, they're saying that there's a certain model of leadership that we have to have in order for the people to be free. And the type of leadership models that we are being given, those type of leadership models are problematic. And so I think it's very critical that we listen to our youth, right? Not oversimplify what they're saying, and because it is our youth they are carrying the load of this Islamic revival. If 65 to 70% of the Ummah are youth, and there is an Islamic revival taking place, then the youth are carrying the Islamic revival on their shoulders. And so now it's their time. It's their time, and we should listen. That's all I have to say on that.
If I could add to that, one important thing for us about Malcolm X is that Malcolm X represents someone who went through so many stages of transformation and was able to use his own personal transformation as a model for the community to transform itself. So people like myself who are reverts, like me, I'm a revert, having Malcolm X's example to look to as a means of getting out of the kind of spiritual, emotional, psychological bondage that comes from being Black in America is very crucial, you know, and for some of us, it's something that becomes unbearable. It becomes unbearable. And when we look at our community, it's no coincidence then that we see so many people on drugs, so many people abusing alcohol, so many people with these various vices that they are using to cope. And they're using vices to cope in the lack of organized mechanism of transforming the community, in the lack of an organized mechanism of confronting the problems and the illnesses and the poisons that are being injected into our community. It's not a coincidence. The level of alcohol access that young Black people have in their communities. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence the kind of access that they have to drugs. Because ultimately, it's like Malcolm X told us, it's like a powder keg, you know. There's this bomb in America that's a ticking time bomb, and it's a racial bomb. And as long as these contradictions are not dealt with, there's always going to be these potential explosions. And the young people, you know, each generation is going to produce some youth in it that aren't going to be able to tolerate it no more. They're not going to be able to tolerate it because they look around and they see no hope and they see no options within this system. They see no options within the current way that this society is organized and structured, and they have no room to grow, you know. And when they look to their leadership, if they're being told just to forgive and just to swallow it and you know, just to go and go home and sit at home and pray about it and just sit in the masjid and pray about it, you know, it's something that is discouraging and it's depressing. And ultimately it's irresponsible because, you know, when we just look back a few years, you know, at least out here in California from 2009 to about 2015, I'd say, there was constant movement. You know, there was constant young people organizing, whether it's rallies, marches, meetings, conferences, teachings, all types of activity. But ultimately, leadership is telling people, you know, to go back along with the system and to reinvest the young people into the system. And we can't continue to do that. You know, it's irresponsible. It's very irresponsible. And so, you know, Malcolm X today still remains relevant because all of the contradictions that he was teaching us about and he was confronting are the very same contradictions we have to deal with today. You know. And so, you know, like when Amir is talking about, you know, young people and not, you know, the youth not wanting this celebrity model of leadership, you know, it's something that, you know, we have no hatred or animosity towards these brothers, but we recognize that what they're doing, it cannot be the solution to the social ills that we've been called to confront. We've been given the guidance of Islam, and we've been given reason. We've been given eyes and ears to be able to observe and to be able to see the things that require our attention in the society. And these projects about, you know, making Muslims more palatable to the American political system, and you know, making Muslims as just another segment within a corrupt society, it's never going to work. It's never going to work. You know, you're going to have that segment who want to go along with the corrupt rulers, but at a certain point, you're always going to have a critical contingent of Muslims who know in their heart this is wrong and know that Allah has called us to confront these contradictions. You know, and ultimately, we need Islamic leadership to confront these things correctly. And that's what's most frustrating about dealing with these type of sheikhs and imams. We need leadership. We need imams that can teach us the Islamic methodology on how to confront things, how to organize ourselves, how to conduct ourselves, how to deal with these things and how to think about these things. And yet these imams come to us, and instead of teaching us Islam, they teach us American foreign and domestic colonial policy.
Before I get to you, Tanzeen, I mean, I guess this, both Hannibal and Amir spoke really about something that's captured in the subtitle of your essay, the message from the grassroots. It seems to be a direct reference to Malcolm X's historic speech, message to the grassroots. And as you're both speaking, I feel like what's important in your essay, something that you're trying to bring out forcefully and subtly at times, but add into that the importance of it, is how we should all start thinking about the grassroots, how we should start thinking working beyond the machinations of the American state and the project, from which many of you are suggesting that a lot of our leadership are too caught up into, too immobilized by these middle class sensibilities, you know, and it's that role of the grassroots. And here, perhaps a little bit more, I mean, that's been the discussion for the last 5 minutes, but really trying to ground and both an ontology, epistemology, and an activism that comes from where it matters the most, where it comes from the ground upwards. And perhaps, Tanzeen, in your response about the American project, you can incorporate a little bit more, because I know you as an activist yourself from the West Coast, you've done a lot. So how important is the grassroots and the extension of both what Amir and Hannibal have been discussing, inshallah?
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum to the listeners. It's a great honor to be on the same panel with the real teacher, Abdul Malik Ali. I've been a student of Amir for 19 years, and I've been in the US for 20 years. So that's long I've known the brother, and that's long how long I've been taught to follow the correct tradition of Malcolm. The reason we wrote this article is to actually honor our martyr, honor a shaheed. Now there's two options for American Muslim celebrity imams. Number one, either however they're articulating who Malcolm X is, either they are forcibly and intentionally changing who Malcolm X is, or they don't believe that he's a martyr. Because if they believe that he's a martyr, and if they have the knowledge that they say that they have, they would never disrespect and misrepresent a martyr. Because Allah says that in the Quran, that anybody who misrepresents a martyr will pay a price. So I really hope that the brothers who we address, and there are other kinds of foxes and wolves in our community, that they really listen to the actual content of our argument instead of talking about how to manage the equation. They should really address the content. We're ready to actually discuss, if they want to discuss openly and publicly, because we have a content there where we address the question of martyrdom. So for us, it's very, very personal. For me, it's also very personal because the Amir knows that I'm also a student of Yuri Kochiyama, who was a very close student of Malcolm X, right? So we have a lot of elders that we constantly seek out, and we reach them and we try to understand from them who the real Malcolm X was. So that's number one. Number two, I think one of the things that the sister Isra brought up, which was really important, was the question of political function of the wolf and the fox. Like the idea that we have to understand that some people think, well, you know, you criticize Hamza Yusuf, but Omar Suleiman, the way he dealt with the question, he's not that bad. He's kind of working for social justice. We have to understand it's some political assumptions that make them different, but they're assumptions about what America is. They're epistemic assumptions of what is America. The answer to that question is the same. Hamza Yusuf thinks America is work in progress. Omar Suleiman thinks America is work in progress. Imam Zaid thinks America is work in progress because he said Blue Lives Matter. So they think America is work in progress. All of them do. Their political inclinations might be different. One of them might say, I want to go talk to Trump. One of them might say, I want to go to the borders and talk about the immigrants. But their assumption about what America is diametrically opposed to how Malcolm X thought about America. Malcolm X thought America is something that is completely against blackness itself. Malcolm X thought that America, he understood that there is a fundamental antagonism between America and Islamic struggle. So if we're going to make Islam subservient to America, then we have a politics that's not within the tradition of Malcolm X at all. And so anybody who claims that is misrepresenting a Shaheed. And we have to take that personally. It's that we're Islamically obligated. Anybody knows that. You don't need to be a big super sheikh to know that when your martyr is disrespected, you stand up. And so I would want all our 20-year-olds who are being silent because they're part of different networks and different organizations, and they don't want to talk about our article because they're worried about what some organization would say about what they say, that they like what we're saying. They should not be. I'm sorry, but I must say that if they're youthful and if they understand what Islam, what is the condition right now of Muslims all over the world since the 90s, how many Muslims have we lost in Western war, imperialist invasions? And how long are we going to see the police as an institution disrupt Black life in the US? How long are we going to see people who want to come up with excuses for police and their hearts? So we're going to now have to talk about the hearts of kuffar police. Like, I don't understand the logic of these imams. I'm sorry to be loud, but this is really something that needs to be asserted very, very clearly. Very, very clearly. This Malcolm called the cops who did what they did and the police as an institution to be a replacement for the slave patrols. He called them two-legged dogs. That two-legged dogs term did not catch with the people, so the Black Panther Party came up with pigs. And that's how we were referring to them when we were protesting and taking over freeways in the last 5 years. We were not just going on marches and talking about a speech here and taking photographs like celebrity imams. We went to jail. A lot of people suffered physical well-being. They suffered physically. You see what I mean? So we had young people who right now in jail from the last 5 years of struggle. And now these celebrity imams are coming off the back of that struggle and try to utilize that moment to score political points. So there is no way that we can say that what Omar Suleiman is doing. I don't mind mentioning names, my brother. This is about the struggle. We're accountable to the struggle. There is no way we can say that anybody who, in the name of social justice, that's social justice for civil society in America. That's not our social justice. That's not even our society, let alone justice. So what are we talking about? So really we have to understand the main assumptions that these celebrity imams have that is in common, the main assumptions, right? So when Malcolm was praying for the master's house to catch on fire, these people are praying in the House of Representatives for the master's house. We said that in our paper. So we request, that's the best I can do, we request these celebrity imams who misuse Malcolm's name and hang out with Al Sharpton, who's connected with the feds. Do we need evidence for that? I think Sharpton says that himself, right? Al Sharpton was hanging out with Omar Suleiman at the Janaza thing. And what I'm saying is, if you're going to be hanging out with Al Sharpton and you're going to give talks like that, don't mention Malcolm's name. Leave Malcolm to the real students of Malcolm. And we knew the real students of Malcolm. We know the real students of Malcolm. A lot of them are so humble that they don't actually say what they've done. And that's why we actually want also those leaders to come up and actually start saying things. Actually start saying, hey, we did security for Betty Shabazz. We did this and we went to that. And we want to hear that because now it's too late because a lot of the celebrity imams are scoring points through political nepotism. And so that's where I'm going to kind of end. And if you have more questions, inshallah, and if others want to jump in, we would definitely do that. I want to say 4 quick things, though. Is that okay, or should I wait for you?
Yeah, no, of course, go.
Quick things. I mean, in the conclusion that we wrote together, we wrote about our own classifications. We're not only, I do think about leadership, but I also think about the base of the society. So there is a base in American society that's creating these leaders that like these leaders, right? So in that base, there are different classifications. And one of the things that I've noticed in the movement that actually causing a lot of disunity and fitna is this idea of immigrants against blacks. It's too simplistic. In the West Coast, we've seen we've seen that that is too simplistic. There are immigrants that the United States government is vehemently against. The immigrants who were talking about Said Qutb, the people who were talking about Hassan al-Banna, the people who were talking about Sheikh Abdullah Azam, they had to go to prison, go to jail, or got droned. That's what we're talking about. The immigrants that they want are the one that they want to produce. That's the immigrant who's cool with the cops. Now, there was serious black leadership within the Malcolm X tradition as well, who also after 9/11 got surveilled and attacked and undermined, and they produced actually new types of leaders who were also coming up with arguments that were pro-American. And we have to address that too. And we talk about it in our joint paper. We talk about the Muslim Huxtables. We have to address it as well.
If I can jump in there too, one thing to consider is that for some people, they're going to learn about Malcolm X and they're going to see Malcolm X's example of struggle, and they're going to think the way out of this subjugation, the way out of this slavery is through Islam. That was the process for me. I was sitting in a cell as a teenager. I was sitting in a maximum security cell in a juvenile hall, and I was reading Malcolm X's autobiography, and it became clear to me that in order to get out of this situation, I had to learn some type of way of conducting myself that could guide me through the treacherous path that you have to walk to stay out of traps and to be able to survive long enough to even make a difference. And, for me, looking at Malcolm's example, he attributed it to Islam and to Allah. And so that was easy for me. That was clear for me. And that was, for me, that guided me to study Islam. And then studying Islam, I eventually embraced it. And so, for those of us who are seeing it as a means of struggle, when we come into the community of Muslims, there's certain tensions, because there's so many people in the community. There's so many Muslims who've been conditioned to think that anyone who's talking about struggle and who's talking about grassroots organizing and resisting imperialism and resisting oppression, when they talk about these things, people are characterized as agent provocateurs, and they're characterized and back in the day they called that snitch jacketing, and snitch jacketing was one of the precise function of undercover agents. They would infiltrate communities and organizations, and then they would say, this person is a snitch. They would take people who may have some skills and charisma, or maybe good at organizing, or whatever the case may be, or they just may be very passionate, and they label them as snitches. And it does two things. One, it neutralizes somebody who could be an effective community organizer, because now no one wants to deal with them. And then it also creates these conflicts and divisions, where now people have these fitnas and these little beefs between each other, because people are behind closed doors, snitch jacketing people left and right, simply because they come into the community seeking support in their hijrah away from this emotional, psychological, economic, and physical slavery, and that's a major problem. And it's part of this tradition where you have, on the one hand, the good leaders are the celebrities, and on the other hand, people who stand up and who want to resist oppression, those are agent provocateurs. And for new Muslims who are coming in from a struggle background, or who just have that inclination towards social justice and towards a greater dawah to society, to get away from the corrupt practices of the society, those people who have that kind of inclination, it's really hard to navigate, because people are labeling you in ways and dealing with you in ways that are very un-Islamic, and you may not have all of that knowledge to even know how to navigate that. I mean, alhamdulillah, I was able to have different brothers around me who were able to, you know, continue to teach me and guide me, etc. But when I first came into the community, I found a lot of people were very like distrustful of anyone talking about social justice, you know, unless it was within a very narrow city council, congressman type of way, you know.
Well, but so I want to
can I also say something real quick?
Sure.
You talked about, getting back to your point, brother, when you talked about the grassroots. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, used to make a dua, and he would say, "Oh Allah, let me be loved by the poor." And I think it's very critical that as part of the leadership that we're talking about, that we have to identify with the poor. I don't care how much money we have. I don't care how many degrees we have. I don't care what prestigious universities we attended. We have to identify with the poor. And the poor are the group who followed the prophets first and foremost. When we identify with the poor, we also have to take a more militant position. And this is why celebrity model type leadership do not identify with the poor. Because in order to identify with the poor, you have to take a revolutionary position. You have to take a militant position. Like Malcolm said, you would not be able to organize the man in the street if you are accepted by the system. He said the only people who can reach the man in the street are the ones who are hated by the system. And celebrity model leadership, the celebrity model, wants to be loved. They want to be accepted, right? They don't want to be controversial and so on and so forth, right? And by doing that, they're not going to identify with the grassroots. By doing that, by going in that direction, they're not going to identify with the poor. We must identify with the poor. Take that perspective. That's all I wanted to say on that.
Barakallah feek. And before I get back to you, Abdul Malik, about the religious foundations in which Malcolm X fights white supremacy, Sister Isra, I just wanted to know if you want to continue this conversation about the production of certain types of Muslims and resistance. And then we'll return to both Tanzeen Abdul Malik and also very quickly Hannibal. I mean, you wrote a powerful line about the prison system being in shadow of slavery, which continues the kind of personal trajectory you took learning from Malcolm X. But Sister Isra, your views on the production of certain types of leadership that, you know, maybe alienated and from the poor and where they're located within the overall American project?
Yeah, so thank you for that. So I wanted to kind of introduce this this conversation of like different frames. So I think the framing of Islamophobia versus Islamophilia. So I think Islamophobia for a lot of Muslims is very easy to identify. We identified it with Trump, with the war on terror and so forth and whatnot. But I think it's also very important to kind of re-engage with the politics of Islamophilia, because I think that is the framing that a lot of American Muslim leaders partake in. So I think Islamophobia and Islamophilia, while they're both different, they both share the same anti-Muslim orientation. So Islamophobia, while Islamophobia kind of seeks to demonize and oppress and dominate Muslims, Islamophilia kind of states to the Muslim and white settler society that in order for you to exist, you either have to assimilate to certain values, you have to follow our rules, you can recite Quran, you can do your little prayers, but you have to ultimately identify with our project. And I think this cycle of, this process of Islamophilia is kind of what creates these good Muslim types. So good Muslim versus a bad Muslim binary. So good Muslims would be the Muslims who are polite to the state, who don't disrupt the American project, who seek to assimilate and reproduce these kind of like same types of structures within our communities, and they're just not disruptive at all. So I think both Omar Suleiman and Hamza Yusuf both fall within that category. And then the category of bad Muslims would be those who would stand up, would resist, who would question American empire, who would disrupt the legitimacy of it, and ultimately would be those that have to be moderated by the state. So if you are not targeted or killed or detained you have to be moderated in some way. Otherwise, you're going to radicalize more people. You're going to radicalize more people to take up more grassroots uprisings and whatnot. So I think that type of distinction is very important to identify, because if people understand it, understand Omar Suleiman's particular political position and function in this way, he kind of purports this Islamophilic but still anti-Muslim orientation, we can then better politically clarify the different objectives we're seeking to aim here, and how his role and his function and other leaders like him ultimately co-opt revolutionary discourse and also pacify grassroots organizing. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I think so far the conversation's done a brilliant job in highlighting the kind of productive forces that inevitably make our resistance or activism suit power as opposed to oppose power. You know, and a big part of your article, which I particularly enjoyed, was one of the earliest questions in opening paragraphs. What's happened here on an ontological level to the American Muslim? What's been transformed? What have we been turned into? By we here, I'm not speaking as American Muslim, but inevitably the production here is generative. It's not neutral. It's the Islamophilia, the good Muslim, the one that turns Malcolm X into a palatable foundation for a suitable resistance. There's something happening here, and perhaps here I can bring in Abdel Malik before I go to Tanzeen to ask a little bit, firstly about how Malcolm X can be seen as a foundation, Islamic foundation that can resist this, but also perhaps in your answer you can link the de-Islamicization here of our resistance, the de-Islamicization even of that parts of Malcolm X that are not suitable, and how this links to anti-blackness as well, and where and how we cannot decouple these things, and in what way Islam here plays a role, both through Malcolm X's tutelage and our own traditions. So
well, of course, we can't separate Malcolm and his style of leadership from the prophetic model. The reason why we relate so heavily with Malcolm, one of the major reasons, of course, is that as part of his leadership style, he followed a prophet, peace be upon him. He followed a prophet, and that is very, very critical, extremely critical. The other point is that Malcolm was a return to a tradition that when Africans were brought to the Americas from Africa and made into slaves, right? The first slave revolt in the New World took place on the plantation of Christopher Columbus's son in the early 1500s. It was led by African Muslims. And so one of the themes that you'll see all throughout resistance in the Americas is African uprisings led by Muslims. African uprisings led by Muslims. And so Muslims have always played a major role in the resistance movements in America. For example, if you look at in African American history, some of our most powerful leaders have either been Muslims or in some way affiliated with Islam. Marcus Garvey was taught by a Muslim, you say Muhammad Ali, Elijah Muhammad, right? Malcolm X, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Muhammad Ali. So if you look at our history, Islam has always been used as a tool for our liberation. Malcolm represents a return to that tradition. That tradition is not dead. It's not dead at all. That in this next phase of the struggle, particularly in the Black liberation struggle, Islam is playing and is poised to play a major role in that struggle. And so, of course, Malcolm becomes a major figure, a major example, and an example in that. So I want to highlight those 2 points. You can't separate them from the prophetic model of leadership, can't do it. And Malcolm represents the return to that tradition of African Muslims using Islam as a tool for their liberation. Very, very critical, I think.
Tanzeen, you want to continue? Partly a point, but also a very profound point made here by the brother.
Do you have a class to go to, right?
Soon.
Yeah, what's your question for me, inshallah?
Well, I felt like you were talking about the base upon which, the been an unfortunate division between immigrants and the Black community and the Black Muslim community and part of this production.
Yeah,
but,
I really wanted to break down the false binaries that are put up by civil society, actually. And the false binaries, of course, anti-blackness is foundational to modernity. We know that because of slavery and what it did to human beings. I mean, we have to understand, you know, a lot of people are actually against the idea that whiteness has anything to do with madness. But imagine this, from the Islamic perspective, the very notion of whiteness has to be insane because it literally is saying worship whiteness. Every human being, according to our tradition, are born to be obedient to the Most High. And then Europe comes along and says, worship us. So there is a certain degree of psychological disruption at the level of sovereignty. Sovereignty is an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When whites become masters of slaves through chattel slavery, when African flesh has been reduced to economic units, what it does is that it creates the idea and the fascination of trying to be God. So oppressors have a God complex, and we have to understand that. And that's precisely why the American project is so foundationally anti-Islamic. So how can, again, the fox and the wolf, how can these foxes and the wolves talk about America being compatible with Islam? That's my question. I'm ending my little talk with a question, you know, for the youngsters. You know, think about this, that the real antagonism is Islamic struggle and America. It's not about immigrants and blacks. That's how you allow whiteness to continue to hegemonize the world. And we can't allow, those of us who came from somewhere else, we actually knew this, you know, when we fought dictatorships and such. So we want to make sure that we also understand that in America, people to connect to are the same people that the tradition of Malcolm X connects to, because that was the first Muslims in America, right, who were disrespected. Those were our teachers who were disrespected through slavery. If I don't understand that, then the deen is not in me. If I don't feel that those brothers and sisters who were kidnapped from Africa, that they were not our Muslim brothers and sisters, if I don't feel that, something is wrong in the way we understand our religion. That's how I would say that, inshallah.
Yeah, Tanzeen, I mean, there seems to be a psychoanalytical dimension to your conclusion. You focus in your article a little bit about affect. And throughout the piece is something else is happening other than just the rational process. Whiteness brings with it a certain affective quality on us. You want to tell us a little bit more, since you mentioned that kind of we hinted at kind of a libidinal economy.
One of the things that we need to understand from Sayyid Qutb, and Malcolm X was excellent at this too, because he was actually psychologically analyzing white people. And he said that when whites act a certain way, is from their psychological guilt complex of being the greatest oppressors. Whites know this, that they've been the greatest oppressor on earth in the history of mankind. When someone mentioned Native Americans, we're talking about a depopulation rate of 92%. So you had 100 Native Americans, more than 9 are dead. More than 90% dead. So that's a severe kind of a statistic. So we have to understand that when we think about whiteness, we have to understand it through our Islamic discourse of Jahiliyyah. Is something Sayyid Qutb talked about, which is the opposite of Islam. And how does this Jahiliyyah operate? It doesn't operate only at the level of economy. It also operates at the level of psychic life. It affects everybody in a psychic manner. It affects our people everywhere, all throughout the world in a psychological way, right? It psychologically undermines us. And whites themselves actually, because of supremacy, they become psychologically disturbed as well. So we have to understand this connection, and we have to be really good students, of course, of Islam, but also how is Jahiliyyah operating in today's world? Because we have a future, we have children to think about. How is the society going to deal with them and try to make them connect with this society, which is a society which is against the nature of human beings according to how Islam understands nature. So that's why I would mention that we do have to focus, and Malcolm and Sayyid Qutb both actually focus a lot on the psychic condition of modernity and modern secularism, what it does to human beings.
And this goes a little bit back to Isra's point about the nature of the binary between Islamophobia and Islamophilia. There's as you said, there's a psychic registry, an economy here, where in many ways we're pursuing and seeking a type of comfort that comes out of the norm, a type of identification with power, because that's the easiest way to swim upstream rather than against that stream. And here the idea of them providing an alternative to Islamophobia or racism or anti-black racism, this kind of Islamophilia, which is, you know, in many ways to take away the malignant elements of our resistance, to leave, and it's a very kind of almost consumer capitalist mode right? To remove that part of us that inevitably disturbs that white registry, that psychic registry. And a key point that you're speaking about here is in many ways they know deep down, embedded within whiteness, and this is where the fragility comes out, the guilt, the shame comes out. And they know that the structure of their violence is built on the suffering of others and the dispossession of others. And,
you know, I just want to say one thing. Some of the folks took my line. There's a sentence on white passing Muslims. Some people take it personally. But listen, the line was about that if you pay, are you going to engage in struggle? Like, I'll ask you a question, I can wait for the rest of the time. How many white martyrs do you know? White Muslim martyrs, do you know, that did not come from Bosnia or Chechnya, all right, who comes from Western Europe or who comes from America? Do you know anybody? I can wait. Right, precisely the point. So in other words, if there's going to be a real understanding, so we're not saying, oh, you know, whites are not Muslim. We're saying, hey, the real antagonism is America and Islam. And you're going there trying to be advisor to Trump, right? So you have, so that's my real question. We have to be accountable to the struggle. Each and every one of us have to be accountable to the struggle. If that's what we're going to do, if we're going to talk about Islam, we're going to talk about dawah, we're going to talk about struggle, we have to be accountable to that. I don't care who it is. I don't care what color it is. We have to be accountable to the struggle. That's the main point of the whole article. So all the classifications of different types of Americans, of different races, is all problematic. You know, Imam Jamil Al-Amin had mentioned it, that one of the problems with the term African-American is that it's too American. So we have to understand that all of these other hyphenated categories is too American. We have to understand what it means to be an Islamic worker, what it means to be someone who struggles in the name of Islam, what it means to be in the path of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's what we have to understand, so we can really address the sickness that is whiteness.
You know, if I could piggyback on that, you know, Yassir, you mentioned about the line in the article about the ghosts of slavery, and you know, listening, you know, to what everyone else has said just now, it really like hammers this point back home to me about the idea of slavery. When we think about slavery, people approach the idea of slavery from different perspectives. Some people think about it economically. This is, you know, this is free labor, free surplus labor, and et cetera. And, you know, they kind of think about it in that kind of mathematical way. Some people think about it, you know, in terms of psychologically, violence and trauma. Some people think about it in terms of culture, et cetera. There's all of these different dimensions to it, you know, but ultimately, when we really look in the history, it was a purpose. It had a purpose. And ultimately, I'm going to argue that the purpose was this fight against Islam. There was a war of civilizations in Europe where Muslims, you know, the Moors, the quote unquote Moors, were in Europe, vitalizing Europe by organizing the poor. They were organizing the poor. They were creating contracts that allowed people economic mobility, allowed people free education, and allowed people to ultimately transform themselves and improve their community and their society, etc. But this empowerment of poor people is a direct threat to those rulers who benefit from their subjugation. So when you have rulers who are exploiting the poor people in their society, they don't want you to come in and organize the poor people. They don't want you to educate them. They don't want you to teach them medicine. They don't want you to strengthen them in any way, because that is a threat to their hegemonic hold over the society. So that's the beginning of this contradiction, right? And it led to the Spanish Inquisition, which led to the transatlantic slave trade, and also led Columbus into the land of the unknown, as the Muslims knew it, and the New World, as Europeans called it. You know, and as they got here, they knew two important factors. One, we cannot allow a large population of indigenous people who understand the terrain. They know the terrain too well to be able to fight, to be able to oppress them, because they're going to fight back. They're going to know the area better than us. You know, and it's the same reason that the United States military has a policy of you can't allow Black people to stay in the same place for more than 3 generations. Because once people get established and rooted in an area, it gives them a greater influence and a greater potential to resist against that kind of oppression. So that was a fundamental component to the making of America. They had to obliterate these large populations of dark people who would potentially slaughter them as they attempted to oppress them and our African ancestors. Because we know that the indigenous people had relationships with Africans. So we know they would have been natural allies as they would have arrived here. So it was fundamental in the establishment of America to obliterate an indigenous population. So there could be no indigenous people to lay claim to the territory, to lay claim to any type of rights, etc., so that they could have a quote unquote clean slate to build this project of immigrants, you know, to build this nation of immigrants. They had to obliterate the indigenous people. So that's foundational. And within the fight against Islam, they had to contend with this massive continent of Africa that was full of very intelligent scholars who would also fight to the death. You know, they had to find some way of dealing with that. And so what they did was kidnapping women and children and the weaker people in society, and slaughtering as many people as possible in that endeavor to have a captive population of Black people in their pocket to use against the rest of the world, to use in building their project of this nation of immigrants, and to use in any other unspeakable manner that they might come up with in this project of white supremacy, of domination and control. You know, this was a fundamental, for them, it's a race against time. Once they got a taste of Islam in Europe, they knew it's only a matter of time before our society is obliterated by the truth. The truth is coming for us. They knew that.
Yeah.
It's a race against time.
Sorry, brother. Continue, please.
Yeah. No, it's fine. It's fine. Go ahead.
It's just, you mentioned the role of the
in place, you know, the oppressor's hands are going to get chopped off. You know what I'm saying? If the Sharia, Hannibal wrote a sentence about curbing whiteness. You know what I mean?
When you talk about
oppression,
when you talk about Islam, and when we get away from this American lens that people like to look at it through, right? Americans think about religion as a set of beliefs. They think about it as a philosophical exercise where, you know, I have this certain gratification that's attached to my philosophical superiority to your philosophical inferiority. And it's this whole exercise, right? But when we talk about Islam as Muslims, when we talk about this deen, we're not talking about philosophy. We're talking about a holistic way of life.
Modified system, yeah.
We're talking about a holistic practice that includes prohibitions against riba. It includes prohibitions against the type of interest that capitalism is based on.
Right.
And we know that to be the basis of the white power structure's economic domination is capitalism and interest, right? So already, if we was practicing Islam, even if we didn't think about color, that would already just that one prohibition would have a drastic impact on this society. When you look at the collapse in 2008 and the subprime loans and all of the economic instability that was happening here, that's based on predatory lending, which Islam already prohibits. And that's just one small aspect of all of the curbs and the regulations and guidance that Islam gives to a society. And these things which Americans typically don't tend to think about. They just think Sharia, cutting people's heads off, et cetera, right? But why it became a threat in Europe during the time of the Moors, you know, in the 1400s, et cetera, why it became a threat is because the economic practices, the practices of teaching poor people, these various practices that are inherent, fundamental components of this deen. They're fundamental. You cannot do without them. You cannot pick and choose and say, because I'm in America, I get to pick and choose and ignore these parts of the law. You know, it doesn't work that way. You know, like scholars, like Omar Suleiman in one of his interviews, you know, he said, he gave a very simplistic statement about the Sharia, saying that, you know, the Sharia is that he has to follow all the United States of America laws, et cetera, right? And that's a very simplistic explanation, especially to give without context to an American audience. Now, you know, one of the problems I have with that is that it's uncritical of the type of laws you're talking about. It's uncritical of a whole host of implications that requires actual knowledge and scholarship to even deal with. Is this law sound Islamically, et cetera, but fundamentally at the crux of that problem is the Muslims don't have a social contract in America. There's no contract with the Muslim leadership as to the rights and the treatment of Muslims in America. Muslims are treated any type of way, and the leadership don't have any type of organized, unified way of dealing with it. There's no social contract with the rulers here, and therefore the Muslims are not obligated to obey all of their codes and et cetera, right? And so we have to understand that, you know, there's things that are fundamental to this deen that prohibit oppressors from amassing the type of power that they have amassed here. It prohibits them from getting in a position to be able to subjugate us. They should not be able to have that type of power over us. And even if we were simple-minded enough just to allow that as Muslims, Islam prohibits it. Islam protects us when we take it seriously and when we don't try to dissect it and when we treat it as a whole. Islam protects us from these kind of things.
I want to return to Abdel Malik in a minute, if I can, to discuss the role of Islamic leaders, Mashaykh, and in their capacity to organize movements. But before I do, I just want to remind everybody who's listening to this live that feel free to ask questions, and we'll try in the last 20 to 30 minutes, inshallah, answer them. There's one question here that I probably want to throw to Sister Isra. You mentioned about the Islamophilia and the Islamophobia here, and I think this question from Mahmoud is relating to Ilhan Omar as perhaps an example of the good Muslim here, who has problematic views regarding the Sharia, possibly. Perhaps you would like to respond to that question by Mahmoud in the live chat.
Yeah, so I think Ilhan Omar is a very good example of another type of like a political leader within American Muslim leadership, right? So I guess like how the brother Tanzeen was speaking about Hamza Yusuf, Omar Suleiman, and Ilhan Omar, they can have very different political differences within America, right? One can identify either with the right or the left or liberal or conservative and whatnot. So these are like the basic domestic differences within American society. But again, when it comes to the question of the American project, that is something that they all agree on. And I think this is something that is very important to clarify. That even though there is a lot of domestic tension, a lot of domestic differences, this actually helps to serve and validate American empire. And ultimately, I guess the goal of that would be to diversify American empire for its own interests. So Ilhan Omar would also fall within that category because all three of them, and again more, would all agree on the validity of American empire and its violence and its sustainability. Yeah.
I think that's a good segue to lead back to the debate about, well, what role should our leaders play? And here I want to return to Brother Abdul Malik and ask, as somebody who's played a significant organizing role for the Islamic movement in the US, particularly on the West Coast, if you could, like, what are the key features do you think that our leaders, our scholarship, those scholar activists, if you like, how should they be standing up? What can they do better? And how much, I mean, perhaps in this answer, you can tell us a little bit more about Malcolm X's Orthodox Islamic orientation. I know you've touched on it a few times, but to elaborate in response to this continual production of the convenient, ideal Muslim, what role our scholars can play to resist this and to organize an Islamic movement from the grassroots.
Well, when we talk about scholars, scholars have to play the role of the prophets. There are no more prophets, peace be upon them, of course. So the people who are supposed to be playing the role of the prophets are the scholars. Now, when I talk about scholar, I'm not talking about someone who went across the water and studies for 8-10 years. That's actually not a scholar. That's a learned person, but that's not a scholar. We have to be very careful that we don't change our definition. A scholar for us is someone who has been studying for 30 and 40 years and not getting their information from Yale University and Harvard, but they're studying in real legitimate Islamic institutions that are usually in the East and definitely not in the West. So having said that, the leadership model has to be based on a prophetic model. And in order for leadership to be effective, it can't work within the system. Now, should we have people working within the system? Of course. But those are not our leaders. Those are not our leaders. Those people who play the role of working within the system, that's the role that they're playing. And if they're doing it at least halfway right, okay. But they're not our main leaders. Our main leaders have to come from outside the system. Martin Luther King didn't run for office. Malcolm didn't run for office. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was offered the keys to the Kaaba and all the wealth in Mecca and the finest women to marry and a doctor for the fits that he seems to be having. He said no. The Prophet, peace be upon him, could have become a leader of the Quraishi system. He said no. And the solution was to build our own system in Medina. So we have to understand that, you know, when Allah talks about in the Quran about there are people who make a dua to Allah to send them leaders. Oh Allah, send us someone who is coming from you, right? And who will be our wali and our nasir. And this leadership has to be based on the prophetic model. The leadership style has to be rooted in principles of the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Now, you have to keep in mind, Islam produces leaders that are assassinated. That's how effective our leaders are. 3 of the 4 caliphs were assassinated. 3 out of the 4 caliphs were assassinated. We have leaders like Hassan al-Banna and such who were assassinated. You know who were assassinated? Some of our leaders were assassinated going to Fajr prayer or coming back from Fajr prayer. The type of leadership, the type of leaders that Islam produces are the type of leaders that are not afraid to die. They're willing to die. They're willing to go to the hospital, and they're willing to go to prison. That's the type of leadership that we're talking about. And unless it's that type of leadership, that we're going to have a leadership that is approved of by the very system that we're going against. The system that we're going up against, there are leaders who they despise, and there are leaders who they prefer. What I hear these young people saying is that the truest type of leadership is that type of leadership which the system despises. That's the type of leadership that is the most relevant, and that's the type of leadership that they fear the most. So we can't want to be on TV. We can't want to be at the fancy hotels and make fancy speeches to 40,000 people. We can't not want to be criticized. We're going to be criticized. We're going to be called all kinds of names. Okay, whatever. Here's the truth. But that's the type of leadership that becomes relevant. And again, they identify with the poor. And their goal is to try to empower the poor, empower the oppressed, empower the grassroots. So this type of leadership, they don't want to be loved by the system. They're not looking to be loved by the system. They're looking to be loved by Allah, and they're looking to be loved by the oppressed, those who are struggling. And so this is the type of relevant leadership that's needed today. And for me and for others, it is all rooted in the prophetic model of leadership. This is very critical. There is a prophetic model of leadership that we have to dissect, not necessarily right now, but we have to dissect that prophetic model. One more point and I'll end. Do you know the only people who ever came to state power who never ever got corrupt were the prophets? There was not one prophet who came into state power. Musa, peace be upon him. Yusuf, peace be upon him. Suleiman, Dawood, peace be upon them. The Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Not one prophet who ever had state power ever became corrupt. Not one. What is it in the prophetic model of leadership that prevented that type of corruption? So the leadership that we're talking about has to be directly plugged into the prophetic model of leadership. That's why this government said we must prevent the rise of a Messiah. Why would they use a spiritual term? Why not prevent the rise of a chairman? Prevent the rise of a leader? Why would they use a spiritual term? We must prevent the rise of a Messiah, because they're giving you an insight to the type of leadership that they fear the most. It is the leadership that is rooted in the prophetic model.
Tanzeen, you want to add some more comments?
No, I just want to, I know you have a class to teach. I wanted to thank the Amir again for joining us. And I wanted to thank the co-authors for this piece, and Yassir, of course, you for taking the time. And I know your class, I hope you don't lose your job.
It's a wide institution,
brother. But I want to just say one quick sentence, which is that this is just the beginning, inshallah, on the West Coast. Me and Hannibal and the Amir, we're on the West Coast right now, and we saw a wave of struggle a couple of years ago. And from our readings of political economy and libidinal economy and understanding of Jahiliyyah and what this president is doing and all this these shooters and stuff like that from white supremacy and all that, we're going to see a very serious social upheaval for those of us who are intelligent enough to understand what's happening. And I know that the young people out there, they're intelligent enough too. So we would like to welcome folks to connect with us, to not be shy from critiquing things that they see wrong, and to connect with the real Malcolm X tradition, inshallah. And we're willing to learn together and work on some of these things together. And that's what we welcome everybody to come to, that there's an Islamic struggle possible here, as long as we understand the real antagonism of history, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum to everybody.
Wa alaikum assalam. Barakallah feekum. Jazakallah khair for all of your efforts, both here and in the article, and your extended activist careers.
If I could, brother, if I could say one last thing. We are working on a project to engage the larger community. We would like to see young Muslims and older Muslims too, but specifically young Muslims. We would like to see those people who've been inspired by Malcolm X. We would like to see them come together to organize a conference to get their heads together around what really needs to be done with situations like this. Those of you who've been finding yourselves stifled, maybe in your local community, maybe you need to connect with people in another area who are trying to struggle with the same issues that you are. Inshallah, we're going to be working on this in the next few weeks and trying to gather people for that. So, you know, tap in. And to the young people in us, inshallah, you're going to find humble older people who want to help you and support you as you organize your community. And to the elders in our community who may be listening, we want your help. We want you to come and teach us and guide us. And inshallah, in us, you're going to find humble young people that are ready to take up your lessons and carry on your work, inshallah.
Inshallah. So, maybe Sister Isra and Brother Abdul Malik, if you have any last comments you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, I'd just like to state, Well, first of all, Jazakallah khair for all of you for this participation. I think it's very good. This conversation provided a lot of political clarity, but also just a note to people who are listening. I got a lot of messages and had a lot of conversations with people about this piece. And the overall sentiment was basically that they felt fear that they would be either targeted by people within their community, fear of speaking out. And I'm just here to state that that is normal, that it is okay to be scared of retaliation. It's okay to be uncomfortable with certain things, but at the end of the day, it's still a learning process. And you are always welcome to message any of us for, for future collaborations, for future work, but just know that that fear is normal. But it shouldn't be an ultimate deterrent from doing important work. So that's just my last piece.
Thank you, Barakallah.
Welcome.
Sheikh Abdul Malik, any last comments?
I think he left. He had to leave, I think, inshallah.
I think he
left.
Yeah, he had to leave.
All right.
You can close it off, inshallah, with your nice Australian.
Okay. I gotta go lose my job now, so I'm gonna say Assalamu alaikum. And thank you all for your efforts, and it's easy to lose sight that there's a lot of violence at stake, a lot of spiritual disorientation that's happening in these communities. And inshallah, we are not burdened with more of than our shoulders can carry, but I think leave an example of those who continue to fight, to carry on a statement without much reward and are willing to sacrifice themselves as something to be applauded. So thank you all for your time. May Allah reward you all. And inshallah, conversation continues, and look forward to all your projects expanding out and reaching to more and more Muslims around these conversations.
And you too.
Much love, man.